President Ramaphosa cancelled his trip to the Davos 2023 because of the energy crisis. As I said earlier, all the top management executives of ESCOM are now meeting with President Ramaphosa to find solution to the state of the country's energy sector and the utility itself, the troubled utility with about 400 billion rand as a debt on its neck. In the meantime, their economies are pulling. About 45% of poll or survey suggests that South Africa's economy will hit a recession this year on the back of the rolling blackout that we've seen in South Africa. ESCOM is saying stage 4 and stage 5 load shedding is on tap this week. That's what everyone is looking at. It's not looking really good, as it were. Talk about the economy's likely recession this year because of the load shedding. In the neighboring Zimbabwe, however, we're looking at the ZSE, which is OK Zimbabwe, which is listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, says he has concluded his acquisition of Food Lovers. If you love food, well, you can get it on the market. But let's get on to the energy space, by the way, where a panel that focused exclusively on what the next steps are for Africa's energy transition was one of the highlights of the two-day high-profile Global Energy Summit held on Saturday and Sunday by the Atlantic Council. Speaking on the panel were delegates from the Republic of Senegal, the International Finance Corporation, the DFIC, the US DFIC, as well as private sector energy executives. The panel was moderated by Kelsey Werner, who is a feature editor of The National. Let's take a listen.
So DFC is the U.S. government's development finance institution, and our job is to basically get it done, to get deals across the finish line. We have about a $10 billion energy portfolio globally, $10 billion portfolio in Africa, not just all energy. And just in the last few years, we've done about $5 billion. So the numbers are great to talk about the numbers. What really matters is, are you getting the deals across the finish line? And what it comes down to, it's working with people like Amadou. And so DFC, for example, it comes down to the individuals. It comes down to the operating environment of where you are, making sure that there's actual political will to get things done. We can hear about all of these announcements of the billions that are needed, or the trillions that are needed, new initiatives. None of them mean a thing if you're not putting points on the scoreboard. And honestly, the energy sector in Africa, not a lot's moving right now. What you're seeing is a lot more deals going towards commercial and industrial. And what is that? Why are people doing that? Because they're having too much difficulty working with governments. Government can't offer the guarantees that they need to offer. Governments are trying to renegotiate power purchasing agreements. So the general investment climate in a lot of the countries is just not good for a whole variety of reasons. One of the things that I always try to do is really hone in on what are the key constraints to the investment. And it's not lack of project preparation facilities, it's not lack of availability of funding, but it comes down to really three things. One is what I describe as the political will. And political will manifests itself in not having a head of state who gives clear direction to everybody in all the ministries saying, this is what we're going to do. Or it's creating a lack of predictability in the investment climate.
I'm based in South Africa, and so by now we would have had 2 to 3 blackouts. If that happened in this place, that means we would have had a 2-hour of no conference. Now this is what's happening on a daily basis for the past, shall we say, 2-3 years. It's gotten worse. So we're sitting
at 6. That's after I left.
And that's after I left. I mean, maybe it's your fault after. So a market of that size, which is probably one of the largest economies in the continent, certainly cannot even afford 1 hour of load shedding. So you can imagine the entire nation coming to a standstill for an hour, let alone 6 hours. So that's why I call it the epicenter of the crisis. Now, it's slightly different in the sense that the rest of the world needs to worry about the carbon conversation. But when you are in a complete blackout and there are no electrons flowing, the problem is slightly different. The urgency is slightly different. So what needs to happen? First and foremost, we need to get the lights on before we can have any other conversation. And so that's the challenge that we face in South Africa in particular. Now, we say misery loves company. So the whole of Southern Africa, some of it is actually anchored on the South African grid. So if you look at Zimbabwe, you look at a small extent Zambia, Botswana, Lesotho, without a working grid in South Africa, we really have got a crisis. But it's a perfect storm considering that it allows us to leapfrog some of the, what I call legacy investments that we have done in the core systems. But the solution has to be probably a lot more pragmatic than talking about, oh, we're going to build X amount of gigawatt of solar. Yeah, you will. Probably in the next 5 to 7 years, they'll come to stream, but we'll be dead by then, because we have got 6-hour load shedding on a daily basis. So I think the challenge to the world is, to the global world, is how do we find a short-term solution to keep the lights working, while we are slowly decarbonizing and improving the quality of energy. So South Africa needs security of energy. We do need an efficient, cost-efficient energy system.
I think our model is actually short and long-term. Both. So I live in Zambia. We have 12 hours load shedding at the moment. And in effect, I completely agree with you, Norman. It's a perfect storm. We've been arguing something for quite a while as Greenco, which is that there are 3 key constraints to bringing and scaling up renewable energy in particular, which is our focus, even though we fully agree, as a renewable-only company, that we need gas and other sources of power as well. At the end of the day, it's base load that is required. And if we don't plan the absorption of intermittency in the sub-Saharan African continent appropriately, we will experience challenges to the grid of significant proportions and much bigger than Europe, what it experienced last year, and we saw what the consequences were on the power prices. But anyway, going back to the challenges that we are trying to avoid is to move away from the single buyer model, which is the single buyer of being the national utility. So we were set up as SADC's newest private sector buyer and supplier and trader of electricity. We were set up in collaboration with the government of Zambia, but we are also active in Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Now, what we are planning to do is provide an alternative off-taker in order to de-risk some of the projects and to utilize the regional power pool for risk diversification on the demand side and for better absorption of that intermittency. Because if you plan systemically new absorption of renewables by looking at a regional demand, you can plan it more appropriately, whether it be through banking, intermittency of renewables with Zambia that has its hydrology, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, our current supply portfolio is significant in most of the countries. Our collaboration with the utilities that are key is extraordinarily strong, as is our collaboration with the relevant governments where we are working, because it is the fiscal constraints that they are experiencing at the moment that simply does not allow them to backstop the power purchase obligations of their utilities any longer, because we are looking at IMF coming into a number of countries, we are looking at indebtedness levels of such degree, and or reallocation, as Amadou was talking, of funding to certain social and other areas that simply do not allow anymore this one model, which used to be predominant, which is the generator sells to the state utility, the fiscal of a particular country guarantees the power purchase obligations of that state utility, and you are locked in to an arrangement that doesn't move with the regulatory framework of creating a market for that power.
If you are a country that has an IPP with fossil fuel today, it's very difficult for you to find an MDB that will finance you.
Yeah.
Even if the MDB policy maybe has not changed, yeah, we'll do gas, we'll do fossil fuel, we'll do heavy fuel, but the reality is that chances are you may not get your financing, or it will take you years before you get financing. But if you're having a renewable energy project, whether it's solar, wind, or you're doing green hydrogen, or you are doing even hydro, the appetite is much, much higher. And what we are noticing today is that the cost of renewable has gone down so much that the green premium has come down drastically as well, which means then, if I am a government, today it's more realistic for me to focus on what is the maximum renewable energy that I can have on my grid, what amount of investment I need to upgrade the grid too, so that I can absorb that new, actually renewable energy? And what is the cost of storage if I mix all of that to try to get a kind of base load? If I do that analysis, chances are that will be lower than having a gas-fired plant today or a heavy fuel-fired plant today, taking into account the complexity of building those kind of plants. So other government, you must be realistic. And even if I had gas and oil, I rather export it if I can find a buyer than even to consume it myself, because I have renewable energy that I cannot export efficiently. Why not use at maximum my renewable energy and then export as much as gas and oil that I have in my own country, generate money and use that money to diversify my economy and develop my economy. And as Paddy said yesterday, I completely agree with him that the green premium is going down drastically, at least for access to electricity. But for industrialization, let's say steel and alumina and others, that green premium is still there. It will take more time, but with green hydrogen, maybe we can get there, but it's going to take more time.
DFC takes a technology agnostic approach. We finance gas. We finance gas in Africa. We finance the Sika project in Sierra Leone.
It's new.
What's that?
The gas thing.
No. We financed Sika just last year.
Okay.
But what we don't finance, and I'm going to disagree with you. Solar's not easy. You've got all of these solar panels that are manufactured using polysilicon that comes from the Xinjiang province of China, which is being manufactured using slave labor, basically, or all these human rights abuses. And that makes it very difficult for us to justify a lot of our financing in the solar space as well, because we have to make sure that the supply chain is a clean supply chain as well. It makes it challenging. This is the reason that DFC did a $500 million financing for a U.S. company for solar in India to produce thin film panels, which don't use polysilicon. So the whole entire supply chain, every sector is challenging. And one of the reasons that I'm here is I'm looking for projects for us to finance. I'm struggling to find bankable projects. So that's the caveat. The projects have to be bankable. And the other thing that's important is for public institutions, what we finance has to be additional. So while a lot of people say, hey, for the Just Energy Transition Program in South Africa, why doesn't DFC just finance all the new renewable projects that can move forward? Well, all the private banks in South Africa that are looking for investments won't be happy with us if we're the ones who step in and crowd them out. So it's this delicate dance of making sure that we're playing the role that we're supposed to be playing, but we're keeping an open mind to all the different types of technologies. So I will say, if anybody has an energy project that requires financing, please talk to me, particularly in Africa.